The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to the program. Good to have you along with us here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, and joined with Reverend Robert Carnegie from Chapel by the Sea in Emerald, Reverend Mark Woods from Cherry Point United Methodist Church, and Bishop Dr. Loomis, who's Bishop in Residence at All Saints Anglican Church in Newport. And good to have everybody here, and I hope everyone is well here this morning.
Drying out, Ben. Drying out, buddy.
That's right. Drying out. You bet. We have a lot of issues before us over the last week or so. We've had some interesting developments in the news, and let's talk a little bit about what happened at a community college out in Oregon. Again, the Roseburg killings. The article is entitled "How Christians Should Respond." It's from a service called ChristianHeadlines.com, and this is an opinion piece written by Ed Stetzer. He says, according to early reports, Chris Harper Mercer, the alleged Oregon Community College gunman, asked students to stand and state their religion before shooting them. Stacy Boland, identified by CNN as a parent of a wounded student, said that the killer asked, "Are you a Christian?" Then he asked Christians to stand and said, "Good, because you're a Christian, you're going to see God in just about 1 second," before opening fire. Others have reported Mercer hated religion in his online writings. Such reports are uncertain and often end up being wrong, and I hope this one is incorrect, although the same general narrative does continue to surface. Regardless, the conversation gives us a moment to consider this reality. Because it's not that far-fetched. I'm not one who believes Christians in America are persecuted, says the author of this article. I agree with former Anglican Archbishop Rowan Williams that Christians in the West who feel they are persecuted need to grow up and not claim persecution when they are simply made mildly uncomfortable. The alleged war on Christmas hasn't cost any lives. Yet there is, in fact, a disturbing pattern to shootings at Fort Worth, Texas, New Life Church in Colorado Springs, and in Charleston. Though Charleston was clearly connected to race, in all cases, Christians were targeted. We already have a research database for church shootings. If this report turns out to be wrong, as others have, the tragedy will remain as this will reality. As will this reality. People of faith, in some cases Christians, have been targeted in mass shootings. I don't have any political answers at this moment. Calls for more gun control resonate with many right now. However, Americans are hardly of one mind on this issue, and less than half want stricter gun laws. Okay, now we go on with some other comments from here, but just starting off, and again this week since then, there was inquiries from the White House about the president going to Roseburg, yet a lot of the residents there are pushing back and saying that we don't want him here as a political grandstanding. Again, this brings out, Robert, the number of the same stories that we hear all the time. But the question here, is this something that as Christians we ought to be more concerned about now?
Well, I think Christians are responding to the news media. I mean, all of this gets filtered through the news media. And as we've said before, the old cliche about the news, if it bleeds, it leads. And so all of this gets blown up. And but there is a reality to the fact that it may be time to do some profiling. I mean, what is the profile? If you look at all of these cases, whether in a church or whether in a shopping mall or in a theater or wherever it is, if you look at the profile of the young men, 20 to 30, who are doing this, there's some commonalities that surface. And so I think the church, needs, we have the opportunity to influence our culture. Mm-hmm. And so I think what we need to be advocating for is a a mental health system that will identify and treat these young men before they get to this point of actualizing their murderous fantasies. And so you look at the things that usually appear. They're 20 to 30. They have terrible social skills. They are generally from a broken home and often living with their mothers. They have a fascination with guns and violent video games. And many of them have been or still are on psychotropic drugs. They have a history of psychotropic drugs. Well, that's a pretty identifiable population.
In this case, Mercer, understood from a news report today, was actually discharged from the Army for attempting suicide, but because he was discharged with that and not charged, he wasn't discharged dishonorably. It didn't maintain on his record, and it didn't show up in any background check.
Yeah, so I'd say we've got a problem in a segment of our youth culture. It's a fairly small population. And so I would say that the church needs to develop a method or encourage, those in those fields to come up with a strategy for identifying and treating these people and flagging them. And if that means, they're not allowed to be around guns or whatever, I don't think the solution is to ban guns. I mean, that's never going to happen in the United States without a major fight. But if you are looking for solutions, I think the church needs to advocate for that, for the people that are obviously suffering in this case. Then it goes to the gun-free zones and all of that.
There are some other responses
definitely
here.
Steps.
Mike Huckabee this week also said, this wasn't a gun problem. This is a sin problem.
Yeah,
this is a problem about brokenness. And in this article, again, this article says, first, Christians need to be ready to give an answer for the hope that they have. 1 Peter 3:15, yes, even if that causes our own deaths. And second, Christians can follow the beautiful example of our brothers and sisters of Christ in Charleston in offering forgiveness. And third, we have to trust God when we don't understand. Any responses from the other side of the table over here? Mark?
Yeah, I just I've said this before when we talk about this. I just do we have any responsibility as a society in this? Usually, when this happens, we and I don't think Robert said this at all, but we usually just say, "Well, the person was a nut. They're crazy." And that allows us some kind of dismissal of the situation. Like, we can dismiss that our society has any responsibility in this situation. We just say they're not, and you can dismiss it. And I'm wondering if the church needs to take some kind of responsibility, or our society in general needs to take some kind of responsibility in how these things are created, how a culture where this becomes frequent is engendered in our society. And that's more like a question, than a comment, I guess. But I feel like we can't just say, well, the guy in Oregon was just a nut and all these guys who do this are just nuts. We have to take some kind of responsibility. I don't know exactly what that looks like, Ben, I'll be honest. But I worry that it's too easy to dismiss with just a kind of, well, they're crazy. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm trying to ask a question, too, on where is our responsibility in this?
Well, I think my question is a similar one, but it has to do with how we're viewing a response. Here's what I mean. Are we talking about the whole church? In other words, Christendom in the United States standing up and taking a position, leading a charge, helping somehow. And I actually think that Christianity in its best days actually works in a smaller context. So I think what happened in Charleston was a group of local Charleston Christians responded appropriately to a Charleston event.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, I mean, I don't actually feel like there needs to be some national Christian outcry. What I think needs to happen is that in places like Roseburg, the Christian community has to go and minister to the people who have been hurt and the families of those who've been wounded and killed, and that is, and to my mind, that is the appropriate Christian response.
An introspective response more.
A contextualized response. Yeah. Let the Christians rise up from their homes and deal with the situation in their community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, if we look around in our own congregations, we'll find in our own congregations some of those check marks that you ticked off there, Robert, about young people or people on psychotropic drugs, and a number of people clinically depressed and or diagnosed, and a number of people have had issues with this in the past, and so we have our job to do.
That's right, and I really like that answer, Doc. That that's what the church does. We comfort the suffering. We bind up the brokenhearted. We do all of that in post event. And I was kind of going to, because a lot of the debate online, a lot of the conversations I've been having about this is, you hear the media saying, we've got to do something. And so right now, the only something that's being really pushed is, trying to eliminate guns and
because only the grand scale is something that's recognized.
Exactly. So I think the church does have a voice in that discussion.
Okay, well, there's more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. An elected official in Tennessee had certainly some interesting comments on this as well. We'll come to that in just a moment. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis, Reverend Mark Woods, Reverend Robert Cornegy. And we are talking about what's happening in Roseburg, Oregon, in that community college. And following that shooting, Doc, as you said, a contextualized response. And Robert, you're saying that is what's happening actually in that community. A lot of people are responding that way.
We're starting to get reports. There's starting to be media reports of the pastors. And in fact, one pastor's daughter was in that incident and survived it. And and so it's pretty clear. Although at the time this article was written, there was this sense, well, maybe he really didn't call out Christians.
That's
but
right.
It's pretty much been confirmed that he did. And so his first targets were, I don't know how many of the 10 he killed were. We don't know that yet.
It didn't seem to matter. He was after this teacher and all that.
That's right. There were others as well, and so. So the question is, I think one of the big things we have to get over is this myth that there can actually be a thing called a gun-free zone. That really is just absurd, and that it's wishful thinking basically that you can have a place that's a gun-free zone. And one of my friends who's very adamant about that, I told him, I said, well, look, why don't you do this? Why don't you just get a sign made and put it in front of your house that says, this is a gun-free zone. Try that for a couple of months and see how it works. Because you're just inviting. There's a thing called deterrence. And what gun-free zones do is remove that element of deterrence from the process. And it's already been proven that, or demonstrated facts are that these mass shootings take place in venues, in locations that are advertised gun-free. And so there's a real problem with that.
But I don't know that I haven't read anything that this guy wouldn't have done it anyway. I mean, that it wasn't really a concern of his, is that whether or not somebody was armed where he was going. I mean, I don't know that. I mean, it's like saying that all criminals eat peanut butter, so peanut butter causes criminality. I mean, so
well, this is pretty direct correlation. I mean, they have maybe not this gentleman, but the others that have done it. I mean, they have purposefully the movie theater shooter. There were like 7 different theaters playing Batman movie, and he picked the one that was a gun-free zone. So he didn't go to the others. So he had already plotted it out. So there's evidence that this is a factor in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Robert, would you then, I don't know if you want to make the transition to this next article, Ben,
Oh,
but
yeah.
Robert seems to possibly be able to agree with Lieutenant Governor Ramsey from Tennessee. That's the argument that he was making. Christians should carry guns because it will deter, on some level, what's happening.
Bring
Yeah,
that
why don't you
article in
intro
today. From the Washington Post. Christians serious about their faith, is a quote from him, should consider getting guns, Lieutenant Governor says. Like many Americans, Tennessee Lieutenant Governor Ron Ramsey took to social media to post his reaction to the mass shooting last week at Oregon's, Umpqua Community College. Ramsey's Facebook post Friday focused on one aspect of the tragedy. The gunman reportedly asked his victims whether they were Christian, then shot them if they answered yes. Ramsey's solution: fellow Christians who are serious about their faith should think about getting a handgun permit. He included a link to the state government website and gave instructing residents on how to acquire a permit. The recent spike in mass shootings across the nation is truly troubling, wrote Ramsey, as Speaker of the Tennessee Senate. Whether the perpetrators are motivated by aggressive secularism, jihadist extremism, or racial supremacy, their targets remain the same: Christians and defenders of the West.
Yeah, well, so back to your question, Mark, I would say that his appeal should have been made more generally, personally, I think. I mean, we have the right in this country to carry arms. And so I would say that his appeal should have been to the citizenry, not just Christians, that you have a reminder that you have the right to defend yourself. And and yourself and others. And so I think those of us who conceal carry, do it for different reasons. And most of those are from a protective perspective.
But on that point, though, about being more broadly applied, we've had our local communities have now followed the lead of many communities across the nation in offering churches special security briefings.
Yeah,
talking about how to maintain safer facilities.
Yeah,
and that's not for naught. I mean, it's obviously to prevent something that would be attacking people of faith.
Yeah, yeah.
And we had the article. Remember, we had the article about the it was the parish priest that offered the concealed carry classes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. My thinking is that he was speaking specifically to a group. I think he really should have broadened that out. You go on his Facebook site and read the comments on there, and they're about 50-50 on there. Some are calling him, crazy for having done that. Some are saying thank you for having encouraged, for taking that responsibility to defend yourself. The police respond. They don't. They're not really capable of being there all the time. What is it? You've heard it said probably that I conceal carry because I can't carry a cop. Yeah. And so that's kind of the attitude in that.
Yeah, I may be way in the minority here, but it just seems to me, for me, it's very hard for me to make a Christological argument on Christians reacting in that way. And it seems completely based off fear. I'm afraid that someone's going to come in and going to hurt me, so therefore I need to protect myself. I mean, I have a hard time making a Christological argument for that. And the other thing is, I mean, constantly in the Gospels, Christ is saying, do not fear, have faith. I mean, it just seems like the more we talk about guns, you have those who are both sides. It's driven by fear. We fear guns, so we want to get rid of them. We fear guns, so we need more guns to protect our guns. It seems so fear-driven that for me, it just a red flag goes up. Now, I don't really have an answer, but I think for a Christian, this should never be a done deal. We should live in tension with that kind of violence.
Yeah.
Well, we also, again, you could say that there has the fear of the gunman, the fear of the mental illness. We may have fear of the guy who's going to go crazy one day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to me, it's more of a protective
from
issue.
something, which
Yeah.
which includes fear.
So not only protecting yourself, but protecting others. And so that's where, I think where you find
Yet we get no evidence of that from Christ. Not even one example of Christ using violent means to protect someone else. This is why I say Christologically, I find it really hard to make that argument. I wish I could, because then other people wouldn't have to suffer for my convictions, right? They would not have to. I wish I could make that argument. Perhaps Doc can make it, because I think that Doc is chomping at the bit. I can see it in his mind. He wants to get at me on this one. Please help me. I really,
Well, go ahead, Doc, and then I've
Well,
got
I
some
do
things to
own the
say.
largest number of guns in the room. And fortunately, I did not have to take a theological examination to get them, proving their worth. I think that the not very thinly veiled part of this that isn't really, that we're not putting up right now, and I know it's only a 44-minute long show or whatever we do here, but is the idea of why, if in fact people are targeting Christians, then why? Ed Stetzer, who I've known for a lot of years, puts in his little article that the reason that people are coming out now after Christians is because of the hatred the Christians have spewed, or what is viewed as hatred that Christians spewed, by preaching what they would understand to be their scriptures and their understanding of what the Bible says. I think this is actually a really interesting place right now, because what we're seeing a divide that is broadening enormously right now between the very kind of Westboro Baptist group over here, the kind of
cultish group,
very cultish, but just absolutely adamant about their dogmas, and then over here we've got a group of people who are just as radical about very non-biblical lifestyles and living standards, and those two groups seem to be colliding right now, kind of on the outside. You people can't see this at home, but I'm making my hands go in a big circle.
Yes, right.
But the two groups seem to be coming from the far right and the far left, and I think if you look closely, it's the thinking of the far right and the thinking of the far left that are colliding in these Christian-emphasized shootings right now. And Ed says, well, listen, then the best thing to do is just to not spew hatred. You got to just be careful. You can admonish people, but you don't want to demonize them. I think of the words that he used on it, and I agree. As Christians, we've got to find a way to do that thing that Jesus told us to do. What was it? Love people and admonish people in love. To some degree, I can blame the society and the world and mental illness and access to guns all I want, but in the end, if Christian people will simply exhibit love, people will not shoot us, probably.
There was the example, even this past weekend at Seafood Festival, has been there before, of there's a group with megaphones that sit and yell at people who they feel like dressed or inappropriately, telling them they're going to hell, and they're in their face. Is this an example where this is the pushback to that?
Yeah, you don't see any basis for that in Scripture. You see just the opposite of that. With gentleness and respect is the way we're supposed to present the gospel. So, that's a struggle.
All right, we'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis, also Reverend Mark Woods and Reverend Robert Cornegie, and we're talking about some issues and items in the news. And one of the items that came out this past week is the California governor signs right to die bill sought by Brittany Maynard. This is from the Religion News Services, and I believe they're using it is their own article. Physician-assisted dying will become legal in California under a bill signed into law on Monday, October 5th, by Democrat Governor Jerry Brown. The law, based on a similar measure in Oregon, allows terminally ill people to seek a doctor's prescription for a lethal medication. Medication. As in Oregon, 2 doctors must agree that the person has only 6 months to live and is mentally competent. Last year, 29-year-old Californian Brittany Maynard, dying from aggressive brain tumor, moved to Oregon to avail herself of the law there. And this has been part of the sentiment behind that. In a rare statement accompanying the signing notice, Brown, a former Roman Catholic seminarian, said he closely considered arguments on both sides of the controversial measure, which makes California only the 5th U.S. state to legalize assisted dying. Is this this has been around for a long time as a discussion, as a political and a theological discussion. Is this gaining legs now? Is this going to be something that's going to be discussed more widely now that California has gone this way? Or what do you think? Mark?
I don't think we want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. Most people that talk about these things, because when you sit into a room with someone who's suffering, you feel horrible, right? But then again, for me, the Catholic argument of life is so powerful that it's really, I mean, this one is such a hard one for us to touch because this is not just a general issue. I think this goes back to what Doc said about the locality of theology being done. You know, this is the theology that we pastors do on a regular basis of sitting with the dying and how to do that well. You know what I mean? It's just difficult. I mean, I'm obviously not for assisted suicide. I usually never come out and say what I'm for, right? There you go. I did.
You said you're what you're not for.
But then again, I mean, yeah, that's right. But then again, this suffering is just. I mean, I think this goes back to the last issue as well. We are constantly trying to alleviate our own suffering. And, when are we supposed to do that? When are we not supposed to do that? When is, this is a tough situation. So
it's the parallel that gets me, the right to life parallel to the right to death, which is what we're talking about. And the fact is, and I think this may be a piece of what you're talking about the Catholic argument, which if it is, I embrace too, is we don't actually possess a right to die. That's not a God-given, unbreakable, inviolable right at all. A right is a moral claim, and we just don't have a claim on death. The Bible says that death has a claim on us. That's just the way it kind of works out. And so the fact is that the gift of life is a gift. It's something that is given to us. And we don't actually have the right to take something that we do not possess, something that's simply been given to us, and turn it back over and say, actually, no. We have a right to life, absolutely. But I don't think it's fair to say that the converse is true, that we have a right to death. This is, my life is in his ownership. Not Robert's. Your life is in his ownership.
Yeah. That's right.
It's not my deal.
That's right.
Now, that may not be where you were going, Mark, with the Catholic argument. There are a number of strong arguments.
Right.
Yeah. But that is I think that's the question here. And the state has decided that the state has the authority to take that moral judgment and to grant that right of death.
It simply recused itself from the prohibition of somebody freely exercising. It's not a right. I mean, that's the thing. I just won't call it a right, but it's what they want to do. And this is the state saying, okay, you can do what you want to do.
Well, yeah, they're using those terms. In fact, it talks about the moral right to die.
I hear what you're saying. I'm just saying it doesn't actually exist if we understand rights.
Correct.
I'm not arguing with that point.
My argument is that the state has stepped up and said that they can determine
They're the moral arbiter.
Yeah, that they're determining when this happens. And they're putting some conditions on it. I mean, you have to have 2 doctors and you have to be within, 6 months of death. Right.
Like they know.
Right. Exactly. And so, and you see this with, hospice and others. I mean, the hospice does great work. I mean, it's phenomenal. But, it depends on where you are. You got to be a little careful with that as well. But, There is I think personally that with California doing this, passing this, that initiative, the momentum changes. And if California had said, no, we're not going here, then that would have been a different picture. I think that's the question you asked.
Yes, but let me add to that here now, because in North Carolina, it may be going on. We don't even think about it here because it's not being done as physician-assisted suicide. But an article that was in the news I forget where I got this from. I think it's from WRAL today says, Fran Schneider talks about death as if it's a normal, everyday topic. As a former psychiatric nurse, she has watched people die. Now, as an exit guide, she's called, the Chapel Hill woman helps mentally competent, terminally ill people end their lives. What I say to everybody is, I promise you I will never leave you until you are dead, said Schindler, who volunteers with Final Exit Network, a U.S. right-to-die nonprofit that has 3,000 volunteers across 5 states, including North Carolina. Across the country. 5 states, including North Carolina, have no specific statute that bars assisted suicide. 5 other states, most recently California, allow doctors to prescribe. So what she does is help those that she determines are mentally competent and that she determines are in this particular state, find all the means necessary, in their local grocery store, hardware store, pharmacy, or whatever, and find the means necessary to end their lives.
Isn't this what Dr. Death
Kevorkian
got in trouble doing?
Well, he got in trouble actually,
doctor.
but he was actually administering too.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Mark,
this is just interesting. I love the title of this thing. The quote is, "I will never leave you until you're dead." The irony from the position that most of us would probably take in here is, no, that's precisely what you've done, is you've left them.
Yeah.
You've left them. Being with someone in their suffering is being in their suffering, being with them.
Presence.
But the ability to take all of that away in an old kind of free choice that they would make to do that is actually leaving the person. And so it's just, I find it the dialectic is very present in that statement. I will never leave you until you're dead. No. We've already determined you're dead. I've left you. I've left you as, someone who can be with you in these moments that is not, that is your moments of suffering or terminal illness, even if it does last 6 months or something like this. No, it's just the irony of that title. I wonder if it's just wonderful. The irony is not the actual thing that's going on, obviously.
Right.
But,
But was it surprising to you? Or, I didn't know that groups like this existed and that were served as lay volunteers in some fashion.
Let me ask a question. I think the way in which they're skirting this legally here in North Carolina is they're not actually administering it. They're just telling people how they could do it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just so we're clear.
So the other side of your suffering question is, of course, all of this presupposes that suffering is only bad.
To be avoided at all costs.
At all costs, both for the sake of me, your child, the extended family that you're putting through so much with your suffering, and you yourself. And I think from a faith matters standpoint, as Christians, we don't actually view suffering as being meaningless. In fact, we give it great meaning.
Right.
For I think all of us, the most important and dramatic changes and growths in our life came during times of suffering, and we say, well, but this is different. This is the suffering at the end, and I actually see contextually. What we don't cure as Christians, we care for. I mean, that's the thing. If you can't cure, you care. And I think this is the one thing working at hospice taught me, is that there's actually a ministry of the local body that takes place in caring in hospice. And I think that's something we don't really want to give up.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the scripture that comes to mind, of course, is Psalms, where David said, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." And that is, of course, there can be other situations than imminent death that scripture would apply to, but that does apply to that moment when death is approaching. And where is God? He's right there in the valley of the shadow of death. And that can be, I know you've talked about it with your dad.
Yeah, exactly.
You learn so much through, and myself as well, being with people in that, those moments when their life comes to an end, if you want to say naturally.
I think in my dad's case, it was a case where so many other people as well, too. They didn't want other people to suffer.
Right.
You know, he asked the doctor when he was in his last 4 or 5 days, pretty sure that it was, and that can he just end this? I hate this vigil, when they're hanging around. He said, but it was during that 4 or 5 days I learned a lot about him I didn't know.
Yeah.
So there's still always that the life is still a gift, right up till it's done here. We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters in our final segment coming up next here on the program. I hope that you will stay with us for one more segment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. Hey, welcome back here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And joining us today, Bishop Doc Loomis from All Saints Anglican Church. Also, we have Reverend Mark Woods from Cherry Point United Methodist and Reverend Robert Cornegie from Chapel by the Sea. And as we talk in we can't go a week without having a Catholic segment for all us non-Catholics, right? I mean, Robert, so you brought us one here. And this one is from Aleteia, Aleteia, and it's called Breaking. Notable Catholic Convert Signed Open Letter to Synod Fathers. Plea for the Synod to be as scandalous to moderns as Christ was to the apostles. I love the subtitle of that, even though letter writers didn't necessarily write it that way. It says, addressed to the Pope and the Synod Fathers, the just released open letter to the Synod from over 100 converts calls them to uphold Christ's teaching on the indissolubility of marriage with the same fidelity, the same joyful and courageous witness the Catholic Church has displayed throughout her entire history. The signers explain that the Church's teaching on marriage and sexuality, now so widely criticized even within the Church, helped draw them to the Church, especially as she held to these truths when society began to reject them. Robert, you said you know a number of these people.
Yeah, and I know, it was poignant because I remember when they crossed over to Catholicism. However, what is it? Swim the Tigris.
Swim the Tiber.
And by Tiber. And so, and the kind of shook the number of these are leading apologist thinkers who have been and when you study apologetics, you tend to go back to the early fathers, and you tend to read and a lot of the teaching is directly associated with the Catholic Church, obviously. So if you're going back there, so Aquinas and Augustine and all those guys are right there. So, and I found it poignant that this move of this Pope to on surface appearance, as the media is portraying it,
yes,
that he's sort of liberalizing the language, at least the language that they use around some of these issues. And so the reaction from these convert Catholics, rather than cradle Catholics, has been, hey, whoa, wait a minute. This was why we came over here in the first place, because you guys were so solid on these areas. And so they've grown a little nervous. So several of them are buddies, and I've talked to them, and they are firm in their decision, but they are advocating for holding to the foundational teachings of the Church.
Well, it's an interesting time because it's like, we've seen the Church split into 30,000 plus denominations, and it's as if there's this giant iceberg, and people keep chiseling away at it and dividing it up. And these groups, both Lutherans and a lot of Anglicans, a lot of my friends also did the whole swim the Tiber thing and went there. And it's like they're getting on increasingly smaller pieces of orthodoxy, if you will. And the Roman Church, while it's a huge body, is really, in a lot of people's minds, it's the last remaining bastion of orthodoxy and seriousness about the inerrancy of Scripture and such. And so you see all these people getting on what they think is the last possible floating piece of ice in the ocean, and all of a sudden the Pope gets out a torch and goes, "Hey, we're gonna melt this puppy right now." That's a challenge.
Yeah. It's fascinating to read through that and what it is that attracted them, because in Protestantism we don't have the magisterium, we don't have a pope. So we don't have a single voice speaking, and so part of their justification in shifting over, and then many of these were raised Catholic, and they went into Protestantism, and now they've sort of gone, they've gone back.
They were tribal Catholic.
Yeah, they've gone back home, right. And so there's some of that in there. But for others, for the guys I know, the Bujacheskis and the others, these are people that are definitely have thought through the process, and so now the red flag is flying. Whoa,
Mark.
Yeah, I have. This might sound like a non sequitur, but I looked up that word. It's aletheia, which means truth or disclosure in Greek. So that's where this article comes from. Yeah, see, I told you, now it just kind of kills what we were talking about here. No, I find this really interesting. I said this in the break, that, there was, a few years ago, there was another open letter that was written by some Lutheran professors who had then converted to Catholicism for these very kind of reasons, right? They felt that there was a kind of, they called it the brain drain in Lutheranism, and they were kind of returning home to Catholicism. And now you have another open letter from a similar group, a bunch of Protestants who have kind of, what you might say, went home to Rome, I guess. Mm. And now they're writing a similar letter now to the Catholics, saying, we need to pay attention here. But I don't think that they should worry too much on some level. I think that, like you said, Robert, I think some of the media is grabbing some of the things that Pope Francis says and saying, he's saying it's crazy, but I don't think he's really doing that. I think he's just kind of reaching across and trying to start dialogues with people that you wouldn't necessarily always see the Catholics starting dialogues with.
His orthodoxy comes from a different angle, but it's still the orthodox position of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I would definitely say that.
Yeah. All right. Again, this is an interesting article, but is this a reaction? You sort of alluded to that, Mark. Is this a reaction to media reaction more than it is a reaction to any change in the church?
I mean, maybe it could be. Yeah, I think it's interesting that this is former Protestants doing this, right? I don't know how to say that without sounding, derogatory or something like this, but it's interesting that it's former Protestants. Go ahead, Ben.
Well, former Protestants who have no protest any longer. Is that?
Yeah, maybe that'd be an interesting way to think about it. But and they might not be technically protesting, but there might not. I don't know. I probably shouldn't say that. All right, go to the next thing.
Well,
I'm not going to say that.
With all my years as a pastor, this is the way I just answer your Protestant question. When somebody would leave a church and then come to our church, right? The first thing we would sit down with them and say, why did you leave that church? What's your issue? What are you protesting about? What was the big deal? So it just makes sense that we would send a bunch of people would slide over to this other church, and then they would be the first ones to get all in a bunch about it. Absolutely. This surprises me not at all. And what I like about it, I don't know if you guys watched the show, was on EWTN for years. I think it's still on. I think it's called Coming Home. Yeah. And it's where they interview notable Protestants who have found their way back to Rome. It's a brilliant show. I love it.
Yeah, I've seen that.
But what's the phrase I heard a guy say on that once that I loved was, he said, I was born and raised in a non-denominational church. And so if you think of the church and its divisions as being a giant kind of tree of life, he said, I was way out there where the berries are hanging on the end. And he said the slightest breeze was blowing me back and forth. So I kind of crawled back in a little closer, and I became a Methodist. And there I felt,
Then
but
keep
I
on
was
moving up the tree.
still moving. And I kept crawling. Finally, I had to just come and hug the trunk. I thought, well, there's some wisdom to that.
Yeah. And it's true, you know. I mean, where is a protest going to come from but from a bunch of former protesters, so Protestants. So, but they, I think they do recognize that there is a legitimate question about some of these things, and so they're just raising their voices. And it's interesting that they sort of limited it to those who just came over, basically, rather than opening it up to the broader part of it. And they, I mean, you could say that they really just don't know how to be good Catholics yet. So,
I mean,
that's kind of where you were going.
And with that, I wanted to say, in Methodism, doctrine is voted on.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
vote our doctrine, right?
Right.
In Catholicism, you receive.
You receive doctrine. That's right.
It is a gift that you receive, and in Methodism and Protestantism, it's not. It's let's get together and have a vote.
We negotiate.
Let's negotiate.
Well, back to
the
the tree analogy. Sometimes we vote to saw off the limb that we're on.
Right? Yeah, that's true.
This is eerily similar to the whole immigration issue right now, isn't it? See how you can make a room just stop and get quiet all of a sudden? Because it's the immigrants now that are coming into this country that are banding together and demanding that the country be different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Doggone Catholic immigrants.
But do they? I was interested in how they even got together. I mean, did they go en masse to?
They have a database, evidently.
Yeah.
Their own database.
They have a Facebook page. Almost certainly.
Most certainly. Of all these recently converted. So, I don't know. I don't know how they put that together, but it's going to be interesting to watch this if other groups are going to pick up on this and demand.
Well, what they're demanding is that their church stand for what they think the church stands for, right?
Well, what the church said that church stood for when they came over.
Yeah. It wouldn't hurt any of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Really. All right. Well, we thank you once again for joining us on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegie, Bishop Doc Loomis, and also Reverend Mark Woods. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.